Okay. So, good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Good evening.
So this is a simulation we have today. Let me explain what are we doing in a simulation first, and then we will pretend as if we are in the real life. So simulation is basically, we are pretending that we actually have the Israeli-Palestinian Confederation, and we have Parliament, we have a President, I'm the President, we have a Vice President who is sick today, we have Prime Minister of Israel that is sitting here because he was invited. Can you please raise your hand? We have the President of the Palestinian authorities. Could you raise your hand? And we have Hamas Leader. And we also are honored to have the President of the United States here. And the President of the World Bank agreed to show up.
Where'd he go?
Where did the word
go? Oh.
All right.
So this is not, as you know, this is not a real event. This is just a simulation, but you have to pretend that it is a real event. Any questions after that? So, congratulations, Israeli-Palestinian Confederation Parliament member. You have been elected to be Parliament members in the first election in the history of the conflict of Israel and Palestine. Our goal is to make peace, and we have conducted election, and you have ran on the platform that you would like to give peace and prosperity to your district. You have been elected for the first parliament in the world to represent your district. As you can see, your district could be mostly Israeli or mostly Palestinian. It could be a combination of both. But when you ran to be the parliament member, you promised your constituents that your goal is to promote peace and prosperity for your district. So you are not running to promote the entire nation of Israel or the entire nation of the Palestinian. Your first goal is your district. The president of the Palestinian is responsible for the Palestinian people. Hamas leader is responsible for the Palestinian people. The Prime Minister of Israel is responsible for the Israeli people. You are responsible for the people who elected you. The people who elected you are the people in your district. I have been elected by the entire area. So my responsibility as the president of the Israeli-Palestinian Confederation is the entire area of Israel, the West Bank, and Gaza, because I have been elected by the entire area. The vice president, who was also elected, will rotate with me after 2 years. So if I am Israeli, the vice president is Palestinian, and we will rotate after 2 years. Since I got the most vote, I am the president, but in 2 years, I will become vice president. You have, because you've been the first elected in the history of humanity, you have an enormous responsibility. And your responsibility is, like I said, it's for your district, but it's also to make peace and to allow prosperity. So I am hoping that you will see the big picture, because the whole world is watching us. Now, I also would like to thank the world leaders and the President of Palestine, Hamas leader, and the Prime Minister of Israel, and the President of the United States, and the World Bank, of course, who were gracious enough to come in this historic moment. And I want to thank you, and I want to be sure that you understand your responsibility towards the whole world, because this is a historic moment. So the first thing we need to do is, because you've been elected, we need to agree on a constitution. And I would like you all to turn to page 4, and I will read out loud the Constitution. Now, as Parliament members, you are allowed, by the way, are there any questions up to now?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
So the number on the left is the Palestinian constituents, and the one on the right is the Israeli constituents.
Well, if you are a Palestinian,
Yeah.
then the number on the left is the number of your constituents.
Yes, got it.
Okay.
One more question. The compensation of the Palestinian refugees, the option 1, return and $250,000 compensation. What is this? Is this for per person or per family?
Well, we haven't gotten to this.
Okay.
We don't have, the
No,
Parliament
I
has
just
not yet taken.
I just want to know what I'm going to say later.
Well, you will be confronted with the world leader. Okay?
Okay.
Well, I'm sorry, I didn't
No, I just wanted to.
take one for Ibal. Okay, so I have summarized the Constitution. Of course, this is not the whole Constitution, but these are the main points. And I'm going to read it to you out loud, and you can read it with me. And I'll ask you to ratify the Constitution or to make changes. This is kind of like the real deal. So you can say, I'm not happy, I want to change this, I want to change that, or whatever. Okay? So, we believe that Palestinians and Israelis are entitled to equal rights under the law and guaranteed human rights and freedom. The Israeli-Palestinian Confederation does not intend to supersede or supplant the Palestinian or Israeli governments, nor to abrogate or undermine any agreements between those governments. We recognize that the government of Israel is the legitimate government of the Israeli people, and the government of Palestine is the legitimate government of the Palestinian people. Our purpose is to resolve conflicts and to expand the relationship between Palestinians and Israelis in a fair and equitable manner. We believe in equal rights under the law, guaranteed human rights, and freedom for all. We voluntarily give the Israeli and Palestinian heads of government and those nations' legislators veto power over legislation we pass relating to the sovereignty of those nations. We believe in the separation of power between the legislative, executive, and judicial branches. We believe in the creation of a secular government for the people residing in Israel and Palestine. We believe in having a separate judicial branch relating to Israeli-Palestinian Confederation legislation with Israeli and Palestinian judges with a system to avoid biased decisions. So this is the short version of the Constitution. And
I have a question.
I would like, does anyone have comments or questions about that? Yes, Arthur.
The last one in the Constitution, we believe in having a separate judicial branch. That seems to contradict the sovereignty of the state.
We believe in having a separate judicial branch. Yes, it is. It's a separate from the Israeli and the Palestinian government judicial branch. Yes.
Yes, but how do you enforce those judgments?
Well, that would be up to legislation later on, but this is the Constitution. This is what we believe in general. Then we'll have legislation, and then we will deal with enforcement, we will deal with issues. But this is just the general statement of our beliefs.
Perhaps, I think maybe you want the word independent judiciary, is that perhaps what you want? Assam? Do you think that would satisfy independent judiciary?
No, I mean, this is I cannot start a judiciary here in this country when there's already judges and police departments and so on. I mean, I cannot enforce my judgments from the judiciary that I create separately from the sovereign state. That's what I was thinking.
Yeah, so this is for Israel and Palestine.
Okay.
It's not the US. Any other questions or comments? Yes,
Yeah.
you're the Prime Minister. You don't get to vote on the Constitution, but I'll welcome your question.
I'm confused about the role of Hamas here. You have government of Israel and government of Palestine, and I assume the government of Palestine is the Palestinian Authority, PA. And in that case, why is Hamas elevated to an equal role?
Because I am Hamas.
No, Hamas, neither Hamas nor the specific government has not been mentioned. It specifically remained vague. When the legislation is passed, and if the legislation applies to the jurisdiction of Hamas, we may decide to give them a veto power or not. The same thing if it applies to the Palestinian government. It may not apply to them. So the Confederation may decide not to give them veto power under those circumstances. But it depends on each legislation specifically. This is just a general statement of our beliefs. Yes, sir.
Does the Palestinian and Israeli governments support the Constitution?
As far as I know, they do not.
But once
Well,
you are
we're going
elected
to-
and you become the president, they have no choice, because now you have got the votes, you have
Well,
to
they can do whatever they want, but we are saying that we have, because the Israeli and the Palestinian governments have not been able to make peace, and because the Israeli government does not have jurisdiction over the whole area, and the Palestinian government does not have jurisdiction over the whole area, we say that there has to be one government for the entire nation, the entire area, even if the Israeli government or the Palestinian government object to it. We are not giving them a vote on the Constitution. That's why we requested that they'll sit separately, and then once we get to the legislation, we will ask their input.
Well, where it says here, do you ratify the IPC Constitution?
Well, that's the vote we're going to take. But before we take the vote, I need to know, does anyone have any questions about the Constitution? You're not just going to you're not just going to ratify it without understanding it.
So who ratifies it?
The Parliament.
The Parliament.
Only the Parliament. Yes?
I have a question about the state of affairs in this region right now. We have the Israeli government is at, with the exception of the West Bank and Gaza, is the Palestinian government, West Bank and Gaza, who's covering what in terms of these other governmental agencies at this point that we're dealing with this? Where are we in
Well, at this point, it's a mixed area. That's the purpose of creating. We are saying that it's not, we don't really know who has jurisdiction. We don't really think that they do have jurisdiction. There are a lot of areas that are gray.
So are we starting from current time except for the starting of this parliament, or is there some fictional history that we have that we've gotten?
We are starting from today.
Okay.
We are the current time.
Okay.
We are saying that neither the Israeli nor the Palestinian government have jurisdiction over the whole area. We are saying that they live together and therefore they have to have a government. We are saying that the government is not going to be in conflict with the Israeli and the Palestinian government because it gives those governments a veto power over legislation. That's part of our Constitution.
So, I don't understand the position that Israel doesn't think it doesn't have jurisdiction over everything right now. So why, I mean, my impression is right now, Israel believes it has jurisdiction over everything.
You may want to talk to the Prime Minister and ask him, does he have jurisdiction?
I'm asking about, you're saying it's starting from the current state of affairs, and I need information about where this game starts.
We believe that Israel does not have jurisdiction over the whole area.
Okay.
The whole area is not voting for the government of Israel. You have people in Gaza, you have people in the West Bank. They don't vote for the government of Israel. There are about 6 million that are not voting, but we believe that they are all in the same area and they are mixed in together, Israelis and Palestinians. That's why we say there has to be a government for everyone. And that's why we created the Confederation, and that's why they have, all these people have ran on the idea that they will be part of the Confederation. It's a separate and independent government for everyone. Any other questions? So, the question now is, do you ratify the Constitution? If you ratify it, please raise your hand with your ribbon. 13. Everyone agreed to it. Everyone ratified it. Now that we ratify, and I also accept the Constitution. Now that we ratify the Constitution, I take the Pledge of Allegiance. And I say, I do solemnly swear and affirm that I will faithfully execute the office of the President of the Israeli-Palestinian Confederation and will, to the best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the Israeli-Palestinian Confederation. That's the oath that I took as the President. Now it's going to be you, the Parliament member, taking the oath as well. So if you can please repeat after, or say it, or I can just say it for you and then you'll say, I do. Parliament members, I do solemnly swear and affirm that I will faithfully execute my duties as a legislator for the Israeli-Palestinian Parliament and will, to the best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the Israeli-Palestinian Confederation. Please say, I do.
I do.
Thank you.
Palestinian-Israeli Confederation?
I'm sorry?
Why not Palestinian-Israeli Confederation?
Well, are you Palestinian or Israeli?
I'm Palestinian.
Okay, all right. Are you accepting the Constitution?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So now now we are officially a government, and we have a president and we have a parliament. And the first legislation we are going to pass right now is financial foundation for the IPC. But before we do that, I am the president. I am going to negotiate with, this is about money. So I'm going to openly negotiate with the President of the United States and the World Bank. And I say to you, Mr. President, thank you so much for coming to our country. This is a historic moment. Your country can see that this will change the events in the Middle East. With all due respect, your country has not been able to make peace between us. We made a beautiful election. We elected 300 parliament members. And the same to you, the World Bank. And we need money in order to have respect of the entire world and the people of Israel and Palestine. As you know, a lot of the people here in Israel and Palestine are very skeptical about our ability. So we need to have legislation in order to, we need to have financial commitment, and in order to operate and to implement our legislation. And we need, for the next 5 years, $50 billion.
Billion or million?
And we are going to ask you for a commitment. And you may put some conditions. We understand that. We are a new government. What is your position, Mr. President of the United States?
My position is that I personally would back giving you half of that money, but I have to see how the my Prime Minister best friend, what he thinks about it, and I also have to clear this with the Congress in the United States.
So your initial response is that you would be willing to give half of the 50 billion. Would there be any conditions? Would there be any, would you want to do it incrementally or just outright give it through the World Bank?
I think I would rather see what Congress thinks, House of Representatives and the Senate, see what the Prime Minister of Israel would like. I haven't mentioned the Palestinian leaders because my predecessor, Mr. Trump, didn't really deal with them at all. So
He wants a favor.
I'd like to open up the door to deal with them, but I don't even know who they are at this point.
But Mr. President, I have been told that as a President of the United States, you have almost exclusive jurisdiction over foreign policy.
I think
you need Congress to declare war, but I don't think you need Congress to declare peace.
I need Congress to back this. I'm not going to act like my predecessor and do a lot of crazy things as president. I'm going to try to work with the Congress. So that's a condition that I'm going to have to get their approval. But I will strongly back giving half.
Will you be willing to make a commitment on national television in support of the Confederation?
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. So even if the Congress would not be willing, then maybe the American people would you be willing to encourage them to support the Confederation?
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you so much, thank you. And what about you, the World Bank leader?
Okay, as the World Bank, we are the IDRD, or the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development. If the law passes that we're going to back up the loan, which is $50 billion, of course, even though it already passes and the money is already with us, what we're going to do is we still monitor the money and we give the money incrementally. So I have directors of water, directors of infrastructures and building whatever in that area. So they keep monitoring whatever the projects that will be how do you call it, constructed.
I see. So would you be willing to work with the President of the United States?
Yes, of course.
To make sure that the money eventually will come to us under your supervision?
Yes, sir.
All right. Thank you so much.
But I have one more question.
Yes, sir.
This allotment or refugee offers,
yeah,
if they return, which is one option, return and $250,000 compensation. Is this per family or per person?
Well, that's what we need to discuss. We'll get to that legislation.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, but then let me go to the Prime Minister of Israel. Mr. Prime Minister, your country has been enormously successful economically in the last 72 years, and unfortunately was not able to make peace. Your government spent billions and billions of dollars on arms, on military, and we think the Confederation could save you billions because of the peace that we are going to try to achieve between us. We reached a tremendous goal today. We've been elected 300. We had 4 million people, Israelis and Palestinians, voting. So how much would you be supporting financially? How much would you support in the Confederation?
Israel, I think, would take the position that they still have to have their defense forces because there are still other countries or other forces that want to wipe Israel off the map. And so Israel still feels the need for strong defense.
Yes, so there's no question about that. But the real issue is that if we make peace, when we make peace, not if, but when we make peace between the Israelis and the Palestinians, then a lot of the risk and a lot of the security concerns from the Palestinians and from the world and the countries around, a lot of it is going to disappear. That means that your military expenses are going to be reduced substantially. So are you basically saying that you're not willing to commit to any financial support to the Confederation?
You're saying that we would have the money because the have to spend on defense would be less. Therefore, we have money. You're saying this argument.
Well, the first argument is that your people, because you said time and again that you will unturn every rock to make peace. And here we made a huge achievement for peace. We have the President of the United States supporting us. And are you basically saying that you're not willing to support us at all in order to achieve the peace that you've been speaking about all along?
But you're talking about supporting ourselves.
No, supporting the Confederation.
That we are part of. Yeah.
Yes, that your people are, your government is separate, but your people are part of the Confederation. Your people will be protected, and they will not have to be in war with the Palestinians anymore. So how much are you willing to give us in order to advance the cause of peace?
Same amount as the Palestinians.
Wonderful. So that's a legitimate, so I'm going to the Palestinian President. Hello, Mr. President, the Palestinian. I spoke with the Prime Minister of Israel, and he seems to be willing to help us financially. He said that he will be willing to put the same amount that you would. Now, I know that financially the Palestinian government is not doing so well, but you have to think about the peace benefit to your people. So how much are you willing to give us?
We don't have any money. We are broke.
So
all we're getting is aids from outside.
So the question was not how much money you have. The question is how much money you're willing to commit to us. I need a number. I need to move on with other legislation.
Yeah. Well, whatever number there is, whatever amount there is to support schools and hospitals, we will contribute to that amount.
Okay. Will you be willing to give us $10 million?
Yeah.
Okay. So, Mr. Prime Minister,
we will match whatever.
Okay.
Whatever
so
our friends.
Okay. And Mr. The leader of Hamas.
We will be happy also to commit.
To commit. Okay. So we have $30 million, but we also have your moral commitment, right?
Yes.
You're all for peace, correct?
Yes.
Is there anyone here that doesn't want peace among all of you? You all want peace. Thank you. All right. So now, as the IPC Parliament, we are going to take a vote on the first legislation. Yes, ma'am.
I have a question. 5 years is awfully short time. Any guarantee for the future after 5 years? Or maybe if there's businesses that started and they will be profitable, can we get any guarantee for them? Because after 5 years, we're gonna be broke.
Well, you have a huge appetite. I mean, we need $50 billion. I am sure that we will have so much peace dividends that we will not need those governments anymore. We will be able to fund our own operation because we will be so strong. But you see how difficult it is to get some funds from these governments.
If we run into trouble in 5 years, the euphoria will die down and people will become skeptical, and then it will be even harder. Can we increase the 5 years to at least 7 or 10?
Where am I going to get the money for that?
Just say it's instead of 5 years to 10 years. It's the same amount of money, but just.
Well, we can always do that. I mean, we can amend the legislation. We're not going to just spend it on, we're going to wisely spend it, and we're going to have control of these governments. They're going to monitor our expenses. Okay, so the first legislation, financial foundation for the IPC, application to the World Bank, other countries, and international organizations for a 5-year, $50 billion commitment to create solid financial backing to implement the IPC vision and its legislation in the next 5 years. We are committed to full financial transparency, full control of the World Bank, directly related to proof of success. So this legislation is internal to the IPC and it's not subject to veto. So the Prime Minister and the President and the leader of Hamas cannot veto it because that's the Confederation own internal issue. Yes, sir.
What does full control of World Bank mean?
That means that the funds will be going to the World Bank and will be paid to us by the World Bank. So we are asking you as the President of the United States to give the funds to the World Bank because we need to have transparency. We don't want to be accused of fraud or misuse of the funds.
So you mean full control of the funds by the World Bank? Is that what you mean?
Yes. So now we are taking a vote. Can I see how many of you are voting for this legislation? Yes or no? Okay, terrific. So we have everyone. Did you vote for that?
Abstentions.
Does for 5 years, $50 billion, does that mean $10 billion per year?
Yes.
Okay.
All right. So we
gotta
have
make it clear that only the Parliament can vote.
only the Parliament. You cannot vote. Okay. All right. So now we are going to the next legislation. And after I read the next legislation, we will vote, and then we will allow the Prime Minister and the President a veto power over the legislation. So legislation number 2, teaching tolerance and understanding. Both educational systems to teach tolerance in their public schools. Devote a certain number of hours for both sides to teach the history of the other. Educators to draft textbooks together and arrange for a regular exchange of teachers. Teaching each other's view of history relating to the conflict. Public television on both sides to carry and maintain number of hours per week of balanced broadcasting to teach tolerance. Israeli-Palestinian Confederation as facilitator to ensure both sides fairly presented and acceptable. So now I present this to the Parliament, the Israeli-Palestinian Parliament, Confederation Parliament. Do you have any questions regarding this legislation? Yes, Abed. You are the Palestinian.
Yes.
Palestinian, yes. And what is your constituents?
60-40.
60 is Palestinian, 40 Israeli.
Correct.
Okay.
Well, I mean, this is just like a comment on the issue of education. A lot of radical in let's just say Hamas or the Palestinian community would have major issue with saying we should let the Israelis voice their opinion or teach our children their point of view because they're radical. They don't accept that idea from its inception. How do we deal with that?
Well, what district are you representing that is 60-40 in Jerusalem, correct? Yeah, that's 60-40. So, as the representative of your district, are you against this legislation?
I'm not. I'm just saying as an observation of something that if we're going to be more realistic of our approach of what we're talking about here, is that we have to address the fact that this would not fly for, let's just say, Hamas people. It won't.
Right.
So how do we deal with that?
Well, then you give us a suggestion. You are a parliament member. How do you... It's not for me to come up with every answer. You are now part of the government.
Can we answer?
Yeah, okay.
Yes, of course.
Okay, the thing is, people don't remember that Hamas was created partly by the Israelis to cope against Fatah. And it happens a lot. Hezbollah, a lot of other influences created it. And like the ACLU was started because they thought the country was going communist and it was going to be too radical and so on and so forth. There's always some kind of institution that's created to block, that's less radical but quite radical. And you're saying radical and all this and that. I'm sure if we have peace there, Hamas will just be an ordinary parliamentarian organization because that's the way peace happens.
Well, I hope that's the case, but just because I was raised in that environment when I was a teenager, I know how these people believe, and I don't want to sort of rain on this parade, but these people have very radical ideology that is extremely difficult to change, and we can definitely move forward with this, but this is something that I think worthy of consideration for us as, well, how do you tell these people who are willing to basically, again, do suicide bombing and tell them, hey, look, I want you to teach your children that Israelis are okay to live here and they have the right like you do to this, which they will not buy.
Yeah, but
and it doesn't.
Let me tell you, it's not you just raising the question. You need to come up with an answer. You are part of the government.
Yeah, but my point is like, I'm not just sound negative, but I don't think how you could convince these people. And this is why we're probably still don't have peace for again like 60, 70 years you're talking about, because these people will view it as a religious obligation.
I know, but you're not responding to what I'm saying. You are saying there could be a problem, and yes. I'm saying everything here will be a problem. But since we are a government now, you are part of the government. You can't just raise a problem. You need to raise a solution.
Well, it sounds terrible, but I don't see a solution for that.
Okay, so are you against the?
No, I'm representing my consumers. I'm for it. I'm just saying, to be more intellectually honest with ourselves, we have to talk about these points.
But the same thing is religious thinking is on both sides. They are the same.
Of course.
There are conservative Muslims,
yes,
and there are conservative
Jews. Of course.
Okay, so they clash. So our role is to teach them that these ideas are not
practical.
Rebecca wants to say something.
Okay, I'll let everyone talk. Yes.
Rebecca.
Point 3 appears to be, it says teaching each other's view of history and relating the conflict. That appears that this is proposing that I allow Palestinians to teach Israeli history, and I don't trust them to do that. I'd much rather have certified teachers that are Israeli to teach Israeli history in the Palestinian areas.
Well, it is part of it that
okay, so how do you want to amend the legislation?
Well,
or do you want
clarification first, because if that's not the intent of that line, I don't need to amend anything. But if it's intending that Palestinians are going to teach Israeli history, I I clearly do not want that to happen. I'd much rather have certified teachers come in that have Israeli information into the Palestinian areas and teach them the truth of our position.
I kind of agree with that.
Okay, so which paragraph are you talking about?
We're talking about number 3.
On the first
Number
page
3
of number 2.
Teaching each other's view of history relating to the conflict.
Right.
Can I suggest?
It doesn't say who is going to be teaching.
Can I
It
suggest?
But it says each other.
It appears that you're asking me to accept Palestinian teachers of Israeli history, and I object.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Can I
Do you
suggest?
object to
Can I suggest that?
Palestinian teaching Israeli history?
Right.
Okay.
In my schools, no.
Why not have the teachers,
By the way,
Israeli
60-40 here.
teachers and the Palestinian
Can I
teachers
suggest a solution?
teach their
Wait,
own
wait, no,
teach
that's
their
okay.
own
We
history?
need, I forgot your name, but you need to talk.
Judy.
Since I'm representing 50% Israelis and 50% Palestinians,
Wonderful.
that educational system is like for me to go and kind of sugarcoat the oppressive history of Israel towards the Palestinians. So it's a little bit, I want them to teach. I want to teach them the facts. That true. I don't want to sugarcoat any kind of history.
Okay. Yeah, Jim.
I was just going to add on the same topic, the teaching each other's view of history, because I represent Gaza and obviously 100% Palestinian. And I think that maybe the best way to resolve that issue would be to create some sort of educational organization creating both Israelis and Palestinians to discuss the history, because obviously if you have Israelis teaching it, they're never going to teach that basically Gaza is a prison and we've been prisoners, so.
Okay. Wait, you're a Hamas leader. You are only given the opportunity to veto the legislation. Once it passes. But you can state your opinion, obviously.
My suggestion is, since Nabil says there are extremists on both sides, I think whatever is going to be put together as education can be put together by the moderates from each side. If the moderates from the Israelis, moderates from the Palestinians can come together and put the educational material together, that's something that they agree with, that could be taught in both the schools, Palestinian schools and Israeli schools. Just a suggestion.
Okay.
Interjection, not as a World Bank leader, okay? What Yasu was trying to say, which what I agree about also is, whoever the teachers are, whatever it's dependent on what are the kinds of books that they're gonna teach to the students.
Yeah.
So it's still under the government.
Okay. So let me. I'm going to go line by line, and I'll ask you to vote on each line, since we have some people have. So I'm going to take a vote on each one. Both educational systems to teach tolerance in their public schools. Devote a certain number of hours for both sides to teach the history of the other. How many Israelis are in favor of this part of the legislation? 1, 2, 3. Okay, so we have 6. We need 1 more in order for it to pass.
I think you got 4 of them. You didn't count Jerry. Did you put your hand?
Yeah.
You counted?
Okay, raise your hand high so I can. Yeah. No, you're a Palestinian. I just want to see the Israelis. 1, 2, 3. And not enough. It didn't pass.
Too bad.
Okay, how many Palestinians are willing to?
Yep.
Okay, so we have all the Palestinians are in favor of this, but only 3 Israelis.
Well, who's not voting?
Okay, who are the 3 Israelis who are against this? 1, 2, 2. Okay, so the legislation hasn't passed because we need 55%. We only have 50%.
Oh.
So how can we amend that part to satisfy you?
I would have the UN come in and moderate what is taught, and and have different experts seeing what the textbooks say and so on and so forth. Like the Israelis don't mention that they've shot over 15,000 Gaza people behind the fences and killed over 300. And nobody in Israel talks about any of that. They just talk about a couple of rockets that killed.
So we're trying to be constructive
Let's
here.
have some honesty.
So how, the two Israelis that did not vote for it, how can we change that?
Get rid of the second line.
I would say,
Erase the second line. So both educational system to teach tolerance in their public schools.
right.
Without the second line.
And so I would change the second line and just say, teaching the children the history. You have both teachers, Israeli and Palestinian.
Wait, teaching the children.
Teaching the children the history relating to the conflict with both teachers there, Israeli and Palestinian, both there.
The history relating to the conflict.
By an Israeli teacher and a Palestinian teacher working together.
By Israeli and Palestinian teachers working together.
Right.
Yeah.
I think that would be better.
And if they don't have fist fights in the classroom, they're all good.
Okay, we're going to take another vote.
Okay. On the amendment.
Okay. How many Israelis are in favor of this new legislation? And let me read to you. It says, both educational systems to teach tolerance in their public schools, teaching the children the history relating to the conflict by Israeli and Palestinian teachers working together.
Right.
We have 1, 2, 3, 4. You are not in favor?
Me?
Yeah.
No, because I like that devote certain number of hours. Otherwise, they'll do it like half an hour at the end of the week, and everybody's going home by then.
Okay.
They have to
Okay,
devote certain hours.
we have 55% of the Israelis voting.
So, okay.
Okay, what about the Palestinians? How many are willing to accept this amendment? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All of you. Okay. So that part passed. Oh, 7. I'm sorry. Are you for it?
No.
No.
Okay. Okay, but still, we have 55% that passed.
Yes.
Okay. So that part of the legislation passed. Okay, the second part. Educators to draft textbooks together and arrange for a regular exchange of teachers. How many Israelis in favor of that part? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All of them, okay? How many Palestinians are in favor of that part? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. All of them. Okay, passed. That part passed by both sides. The next part, teaching each other's view of history relating to the conflict. How many Israelis are in favor of that part? Just 1, 2. Okay. Okay, so any changes that you be willing to make to that in order to have the Israelis vote for it?
I thought that we already did.
Okay, so we're going to erase that part.
Erase that part.
Okay. Okay, the next part. Public television on both sides to carry a certain number of hours per week of balanced broadcasting to teaching tolerance. How many Israelis in favor of that part? 1, 2, 3. Only 3. Okay, but we have 5 Israelis, so we have 55%. That's passed. How many Palestinians in favor of that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Well, are we giving birth to more? Okay, so we have both passed that part. IPC as facilitator to ensure both sides fairly presented and acceptable. Yeah. How many Israelis are in favor of that? 1, 2, 3, 4. So we have a majority. How many Palestinians in favor of that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Where is the 9 one? Who is against it?
Doesn't matter.
Okay. Okay.
Carry.
All right. So now the legislation passed.
Yes.
Okay, by the Parliament. Now we're going to, first of all, Mr. U.S. President, what are you thinking about this legislation?
Very good.
You think it will help make peace between the Israelis and the Palestinians?
I would think so.
Okay. Would you be willing to give it publicity in the United States?
Sure. If there's something I could do in that regard, I'd be glad to do it.
Do you think we can get some people from the international community to help both sides to come up with books that would be fair to both sides? Would you be willing to help with that part?
If I could, sure.
All right. You have a Minister of Education in your country, don't you?
We have a cabinet post for education, yeah.
I see. Okay. So do you think you can ask him or her to help us on that front?
Well, I'm not sure. I'd have to go back and look at the legislation which set up that cabinet, but if it's within their purview, yes, but I'm thinking that maybe, as somebody previously suggested, maybe the United Nations is a better place to provide those resources.
I see. Okay. All right. Now we are going to the last part, which is giving the President of Palestine, the leader of Hamas, and the Prime Minister of Israel a veto power over this legislation, which means that we agreed as part of the Constitution, we agreed to give you a veto power. Now, before you exercise your veto, I want you to remember all your declarations, not only yours, but your predecessors. When you've been asked what is the reason for the conflict, you both, all of you said, when the other side stopped teaching hatred towards our side, we will have peace. So now we passed this historic legislation in order to facilitate both sides teaching tolerance. Knowing that, will you be vetoing this legislation?
You just had the Hamas, you have the West Bank, and you've got the PLA and all the other authority, the Palestinian Authority. You know, don't just say Hamas, because they are more radical than the PLA and so on.
No, I said we have the president of the Palestinian people, Hamas leader, and the
West Bank and all
but
that.
I don't think the Hamas should have a veto power here. You have
that's not for you to decide. Sorry, we passed the legislation, Mr. Prime Minister. It's not for you to decide.
Yeah, you said before that we had to decide what powers to give to Hamas. And
No.
Yeah, you did.
The Parliament passed a constitution. You may want to read it.
Yeah, it does.
And the Constitution does not give you a power except a veto power over the legislation.
Where does
it doesn't give you a veto power over Hamas or over the other.
Where does it say Hamas has veto power?
It doesn't say Hamas. We decided to give Hamas a veto power.
I didn't.
No, you didn't. We're giving you a veto power.
Wait, when did Parliament, I didn't hear Parliament decide to give Hamas veto power. When did they do that?
You're right. That part should have been in the legislation. But, okay, the Prime Minister is raising a legitimate question. I'm going back to the Parliament. And I'm asking the Parliament to vote again. We voted on everything, but now we are voting to give the Israeli Prime Minister, the Hamas leader, and the Palestinian President authority to veto this legislation. How many of you are willing to give those people a veto over this legislation based on the Constitution that we passed?
Well, I have a question. If one of them wants to veto it, the other two don't, how does that work?
Then it's not going to pass.
Oh, okay.
Any one of them.
Anyone, yes.
But this gives the Palestinians 2 vetoes and the Jews 1 veto.
But regardless, one veto is enough to stop.
One veto is enough.
Yes, the answer is yes.
Regardless of the number.
Yes.
So-
You have a complete veto.
Yeah, you have a veto.
You
power.
Regardless,
Right.
you have a complete veto.
I just don't like his.
So
veto.
they have half of the veto, and you have a full veto.
Okay.
No,
They
they
don't get 2 bites of the apple.
But it seems that way.
You get, no, not at all. They get half of the
Neither one of
apple.
them has a full
You
veto.
get the full apple. Okay, but let me
They
see,
have to
let me see if we are giving, we need to take a vote. We may not be willing to do that. As the Israeli-Palestinian Confederation, we need to take a vote on giving the Hamas leader, the Israeli and the Palestinian leader a veto power. Yes.
If the 2 Palestinian leaders do not agree, what happens?
Whoever
Anyone.
vetoed the legislation. Now, that's a good question. We could, then if they don't agree, we can go back and say,
Well, you
let's
just
say
said
Hamas doesn't
You just said
agree.
they each have 50% of the Palestinian veto power. That sounds like they will, at some point they won't have a full veto.
Okay. So we could create the legislation specifically to Gaza, to the West Bank, and to Israel. So if Hamas leader vetoed the legislation, then the legislation will only be applicable to the West Bank and Israel. So,
That makes sense.
okay. So, but let's first decide, maybe they won't veto. We don't know. We can go back to the parliament. That's how legislation is being
So
created.
you're proposing a confederation of 3 independent states. Gaza is an independent state, Israel is an independent state, and West Bank is an independent state.
Mr. Prime
The 3 of
Minister,
them.
Mr. Prime Minister, we have a confederation. I suggest you read the
Confederation
Constitution.
only- yes, it only says Israel and Palestine. It doesn't say Hamas, which is why I'm saying Hamas doesn't get a veto then.
Right,
They're not part of this.
and we are now taking a vote, and we're saying, are we willing to give Hamas leader a veto power over them? How many of you are willing to give all 3 entities a veto power? Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay, so let's do it specifically. How many Palestinians are willing to give all 3 heads of state a veto power? 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, that passed. How many Israelis are willing to give? 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so all of you have a veto power. That's what we passed in the legislation. Now the ball is back in your court. Are you willing to give it, to veto it or not?
Oh, I'm for passing this legislation.
I'm sorry?
He's passing.
He is, he's for passing it.
You are vetoing it or not?
No, I said pass.
Passed.
I don't understand what
He
it
is
means.
not.
He's accepting it.
He passed it.
Okay, pass could mean a lot. So you are not vetoing. You're only given a veto power, yes or no? Or you're not vetoing?
Not vetoing.
Okay. What about Palestine? Are you vetoing it?
No, I'm not vetoing.
Okay. What about Hamas? Okay. Perfect. So now we have a historic moment. The Israeli-Palestinian Confederation, if it did not pass any other legislation, just by, imagine all the $50 billion that we are going to get from the World Bank and from the generous American, all of it is going to be used for that purpose. That would be a historic moment. But let's go on to the next legislation.
Excuse me, before you go on, what are you going to do about the fact that Pompeo said all the occupied territories are now under Israeli control? Although they aren't, but that's what the U.S. is going to do, is recognize all the occupied territories is a part of Israel. So you got to rethink this.
Okay, I am the president. I'm not the owner. You are a legislator. You need to come up with a solution. You need to come up with legislation. You can't just complain. We are here to try to be constructive.
Right, right.
Okay, so what is legislation do you support to deal with Pompeo's declaration?
Well, I think the Israelis should get out of the occupied territories. They're
Okay.
very illegal.
All right, let me propose that
Illegal
and see
for
what
70
happens.
years.
Okay, Israelis, so we have a parliament member, a Palestinian parliament member suggested legislation, and the legislation is the Israelis should get out of the territory.
Occupied territories.
Okay.
They have illegally occupied it for 70
Okay,
years.
fine. And who do we give a veto power over that?
The entire country or just
The 3 people.
No, we need to, part of the legislation, I'm gonna propose that legislation.
Good.
The legislation is, we demand the Israelis to get out of the territories.
And obey international law.
And obey international law.
There you go.
Okay. And who, in part of your legislation, who are you giving a veto power to? That we need to tell
Oh, well, the remaining West Bank and Gaza residents.
okay, so you're not giving a veto power to the Israeli Prime Minister?
Not yet.
Okay, so that's not part of the Constitution. The Constitution.
Oh, I say, I know, I agree that they should have some veto power, but.
Okay, so who are you giving a veto power to? Who are you giving a veto power to?
Well, Israel and the Hamas and.
All 3 of them?
Yeah,
Okay,
all 3.
fine, then we have new legislation, yes.
I just want to mention, it's starting to get late. Would we be willing to, at our December meeting, to continue these points? Because you have.
If they think that it's.
Because he has a number of points, we're not gonna get to all of them.
Yeah, but you know, we should give him a hand. This is an amazing document you prepared, Joe.
Give him a hand.
But wait, I wanna vote on your legislation.
Yeah.
Okay, so.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
Are you saying that that the Parliament, when it passes legislation, can decide which of the 3 entities has a veto?
Yes, because that's part of the Constitution. That's part of the Constitution. They have the power to, because what if there is no government? What if the government changed?
Well, I thought, it's just a remark, but I thought your whole thing was to give comfort to the 2 existing governments.
Yeah.
That time we're talking about Palestinian and Israeli, and by telling them you always have a veto power. Now you seem to be saying they can take away a veto power on any particular piece of legislation.
No, they cannot take away. They can only decide which is the government. Because you have, you know, what if Hamas says we are the government, and Islamic Jihad says no, we are the government? What if Gantz says we are the government, and Netanyahu says no, we are the government? So we have to decide who is the government, which government we are giving it to.
That's a good point.
Well, there's an I don't want to slow things up, but there's an established Israeli government. And my understanding of the Israeli-Palestinian Confederation is that we would always be telling the Israeli government, you've always got a veto power, so relax, don't get scared of us.
Right, that's what it says in the Constitution.
Yeah, okay, so, but
yeah.
Now you seem to be.
But we have no control over what happens to those governments. We don't have, I mean, for instance, what if the legislation only applies to Gaza? The Confederation can say, well, why should we give the PA a vote over Gaza? What if we want to create a joint economic zone just with Gaza? And the PA says, no, that's going to make the Gaza people very wealthy, and it's not going to apply to me. But Confederation can say, well, no, the legislation would only apply to Gaza. Yeah. But it always has to be Israeli and Palestinian. Yeah. So let's take a vote on this legislation that was just proposed. And the legislation is that we are requiring the Israeli government to get out of the West Bank and Gaza and to obey international law. And we're giving all three people a veto power. How many Israelis support that? One. Okay. How many Palestinians support that? Okay. So, do you suggest any amendment to this? Because it's not going to pass. Do you have any an amendment to this?
Are you talking about to Sandy or me?
To you. You proposed that legislation, and it's not passing.
Oh, well, it won't ever pass if Israel is demanded to get out of the West Bank, since they just now.
We're talking about the Confederation now. It's not passing the Confederation.
Oh.
It's not passing in the Confederation. So, and plus, do you really think that the Israeli Prime Minister will not veto this legislation? In other words, what I'm trying to say is we need to come up with legislation that would pass both sides and will not pass and will not require a veto. Yes?
I probably point of order or something like that. I suggest we table this until a later date when it's not economically and impractical for the Israeli people to consider. We, of course, do everything by international law. We have never broken international law, and we certainly don't have the time and energy to move people out of the settlements. And it's offensive to think that you would ask us to do that at this point. So.
All right, so you're saying to table the legislation, the proposed legislation.
This is not the time.
But they have violated for 70 years the international law.
Please be careful who you are, who you're criticizing.
Well,
about the Israelis.
the purpose of the Confederation is not to pick fights. The purpose of the Confederation is to find ways to solve for peace. Okay? Yes.
I think the biggest issue of the area is that you have half of the population that cannot vote and don't have rights. And I think our job is to advance those people to get equal rights rather than divide even more, because the land is already, it's one country really. It's extremely difficult to separate between the people. It will be such a chaos to move half of the population back and forth. It's just not something that practically can be done.
Well, we have legislation on that.
Well, I didn't read it all the way, but I'm just answering for this ship has already sailed. It's true that it's been for 70 years, but you cannot separate the population. You cannot move.
We have legislation number 16.
For later day, yeah, but that's
page
a different story.
15, to give residency, permanent residency and citizenship to people that don't have, you're right, there are
they don't have a
thousands of people.
voting right or decision about
So this is the legislation to give them, it's a humanitarian, to give them the right to be citizens of the Confederation and to hold a Confederation passport, to be able to get married and to be able to travel. They haven't been able to travel.
They don't have an airport. They don't have their own money.
Right, so we have legislation. The next legislation is the Joint Economic Zone.
Good.
Okay, so you're welcome to take this home, study it. You will see there are lots of questions and answers that are at the end, and that explains the benefit of the Confederation.